This is Democracy Watch. So, Mark, it's clear by now the importance that state Supreme Courts have. We've got some major news out of Michigan on that front. What happened?
Yeah, so a conservative justice has announced their retirement, and so there's going to be a real opportunity now to move the Michigan Supreme Court from a very narrow ideological split of 4-3 into something that really creates a dominant progressive majority of 5-2.
And so, what are the practical impacts of a possible 5-2 state Supreme Court in Michigan?
Look, it really changes the whole dynamic. And we saw this at the U.S. Supreme Court. We had a center-right Supreme Court before the most recent Trump appointees got put on the court. I mean, when Anthony Kennedy was on the court, it was still a 5-4 conservative court. But what happens is that as majorities grow larger, because of the small nature and the interpersonal relationship of the justices, you see not incremental moves, you see sort of larger moves as the courts become either more progressive or more conservative. Look no further than the North Carolina Supreme Court, which became a 5-2 Republican court. That's a court that chooses its judges based on partisanship. And now it is among the worst, most reactionary, most anti-democracy courts in the country.
Now, to that point, what other state Supreme Court races should we be looking at right now?
So I think state Supreme Courts are the underappreciated elections in our system, in part because I think there's something about electing judges, candidly, that makes people on the left a little uncomfortable. I think that most people who are listening to you think, geez, we really ought to appoint our judges. They shouldn't be standing in elections. And I want to speak to those people. I agree with you, but this is the system we have. And if we're going to have a system of elected judges, we have to stop sort of saying we don't want to be a part of that because we don't like it, and then let the Republicans and the conservatives create distortive effects on their state Supreme Court. So there are a number of courts that have elections that are coming up. Ohio is a place that I would be looking at. People think Ohio is far gone. It's not. That court is still narrowly divided, and the change of a single justice there could make a huge difference. But I'd look not just at the state Supreme Courts, but the local judgeships. They oftentimes are the front lines on these cases. I really encourage everyone to pay attention and make sure you know who the candidates are. Oftentimes they don't run with partisan identifiers. Know who shares your values.
With that said, that does underscore the importance that the courts have in our whole body politic right now, and also the work that you and your team are doing. So for folks watching right now, if you want to support the work that Mark and his team are doing, please sign up for Democracy Docket. It's the free news outlet Mark founded to focus on everything voting in elections. It's a great resource. I use it on a daily basis. I'll put the link on this screen and also in the post description of this video. Mark, what state Supreme Court race worries you heading into 2024?
They all worry me. They all worry me. In 2020, I'll tell you why. In 2020, we were all focused on a number of things other than the presidential race. And what snuck up on us was that the Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court, who we all thought was, might be in a close election, but would win. I mean, you may remember people thought President Biden would win North Carolina or might win North Carolina. And all of a sudden, Sherry Beasley, African-American woman, incredibly accomplished lawyer, accomplished justice, Chief Justice, she lost her election by a few hundred votes, not thousands, hundreds of votes. And that set off a chain reaction. Even though that wasn't the end of it, that was the catalyst that gave the Republicans the opportunity to think that they could really do a lot of damage in North Carolina. So I worry about any place they can get a foothold, whether it is Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, any place where they can get a foothold either in 2024 rather, or 2025, 2026. We need to be paying attention to these judicial elections.
What do you think is the best framing to convey the significance of state Supreme Court races heading into November?
So, look, if you don't like the decision in Dobbs, which I think all of us think was wrongly decided in a catastrophe, then what you're saying is courts matter, right? The Supreme Court of the United States overturned 60 years of precedent and did away with the fundamental right to an abortion. And they did it because they had the votes. And so I realize that oftentimes these judicial elections are a little harder to parse apart because, again, if they're not partisan, but know who these justices are, know who these judges are, because in your state, these judges and justices will be in the first instance the people deciding whether or not in Florida, for example, right now we're waiting to see whether that state Supreme Court allows a pro-abortion ballot initiative on the ballot. Okay, that's something that the Supreme Court of Florida is going to decide. The Supreme Court of Florida is also going to decide whether there are fair districts in that state, right? So in Wisconsin right now, we were fortunate enough to have a change in the composition of that court, and the court has taken up a bypass position that my firm filed to restore drop boxes in Wisconsin. Okay, these are the things that courts can do. And so it is critically important that if you care about democracy, if you care about free and fair elections and you're not paying attention to what's happening in courts, then frankly, you're just not paying attention, because the courts are a vital part of every state government when it comes to who gets to vote and who doesn't, whose ballot counts and who doesn't. But beyond that, who can access abortion rights, who gets access to reproductive rights, what children get quality educations. All of those things, in the end of the day, wind up before the courts.
And one other issue that we've been talking about that has particular relevance when talking about the courts is this issue of maps. So are there any pending cases right now where we should be looking for the maps to be changed in advance of the 2024 election?
Yeah, and this is a place where courts rule. Courts rule the roost here, right? I mean, and we can start with the state Supreme Court in Florida. There is no question. There's no one who, even the Republicans don't disagree, that the map that Ron DeSantis forced down the Republican legislature's throat in Florida violates the plain terms of the Florida Constitution. The only question that is pending before the Florida court, or Supreme Court of any consequence, is whether or not the Florida Supreme Court is going to essentially invalidate its own state constitution. Okay, but like that's why these state courts matter so much, right? So we can start with Florida. If you look at the federal level, there remains important voting rights, important congressional redistricting case pending in Louisiana. Now, Louisiana is going to have a fair map in 2024, and that's great as a result of the legal work my team and others did. But that case remains in court. In Georgia, the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, is trying to strike down a critical right of private litigants to litigate redistricting cases under the Voting Rights Act before the 11th Circuit, which is the Court of Appeals there. But, you go out to Utah, an important redistricting case pending there before that state Supreme Court. The Utah Supreme Court matters. So these courts make an enormous difference, and particularly at the state level, there are so many more opportunities open to litigants if we can proceed not just under federal theories and federal constitution and federal statute, but also under state constitutions, which, after all, and many people don't know this, tend to be more protective of voting rights than the federal constitution.
Well, let's end on a high note here. Can you give any update on what's happening with regard to the congressional maps in Wisconsin?
So Wisconsin, that case is not going to go forward for 2024. That case is going to continue. I expect people should not give up on fair congressional maps in Wisconsin. The state Supreme Court did force the hand of the Republican legislature to put in place fair legislative maps, but they didn't do so with congressional maps. But that's okay. Look. We've won a bunch for 2024. We will win more for 2026 and 2028. The key is the other side wants us to give up, right? The other side wants us to say, okay, the redistricting cycle's over, or, Donald Trump is going to win, or whatever the polls say. We can never give up. If you're listening to this, your number one priority needs to be, whether you have good news on a given day or bad news, never give up. If the polls say President Biden and the Democrats are down, it just means work harder. You register more voters. Tell your neighbors it's even more important that they support the president. If you have good days, don't rest on your laurels. Go out there, tell your neighbors it's important to vote in their state Supreme Court races. Educate themselves about what's happening in their community. Because if we all, focus on that, then I think in the end we'll all be okay.
Well, I think what's clear for people watching right now is the extent to which you have been and continue to be a warrior for democracy. So for folks watching right now, if you want to support Marc, all that we ask is that you please sign up for Democracy Docket. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.